By the time dessert was served, I had already decided. They just didn't know it yet. My son was still laughing. His wife was still smiling. The candles were still burning low, melting slowly down their glass holders. And I was sitting there, nodding politely, while something inside me quietly shut down. It wasn't anger. Anger is loud. This was colder. This was the moment a man realizes he has been reduced to a convenience. The moment he understands that love has been mistaken for obligation. My son lifted his glass and made another joke about how I was their silent partner. Everyone laughed. I even smiled. But what he didn't realize, what neither of them realized, was that I had already stopped being their partner. Because when I walked out that door that night, I wasn't just leaving after dinner. I was withdrawing something far more important than money. And by sunrise, their life would feel different. Not ruined. Not destroyed. Just unsupported. They thought they were teasing an old man. They didn't understand they were teaching him something. And at 62 years old, I finally learned it. Welcome to my YouTube channel Moral Ecos, where silence speaks. My name is Stephen. I am 62 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that humiliation does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives smiling. Sometimes it carries a wine glass. Sometimes it sits across from you at a polished oak table and calls you a blessing, while meaning burden. And sometimes it comes from your own son. The night my son humiliated me in front of his wife, the house was glowing with warm light. Candles flickered, soft music played, the roast smelled of rosemary and garlic. It was a beautiful evening. And it was the night I realized I had slowly disappeared from my own life. So I did something that shocked him. I canceled the payment. But this is not a story about money. It is a story about dignity. It is a story about grief. It is a story about a father who finally decided he would not shrink to make his son comfortable. The man I used to be. I was never wealthy in the flashy sense. No yachts. No vacations in Europe. No designer watches. But I built something far more valuable. Stability. For 40 years I worked as an electrical contractor. I started with a dented pickup truck and a borrowed ladder. I built my business slowly, honestly. I missed very few days of work. Rain, heat, fever. I showed up. My wife Margaret used to say, "You don't walk into rooms, Stephen, you carry them." She meant I carried responsibility like furniture, heavy, constant. Margaret died 5 years ago. Cancer doesn't just take a body. It steals routine. It steals the sound of someone breathing beside you. It steals the person who sees you at your worst and still calls you strong. After she passed, I poured everything into my son Daniel. He was 34 when this happened, smart, polished, successful. He worked in finance, spoke in percentages and projections. He dressed like a man who belonged in magazines about ambition. And I was proud of him. I paid for his education, every semester, every late-night tutoring session. When he doubted himself, I reminded him who he was. When he married Rebecca, I paid for half the wedding. Margaret would have wanted that. When they bought their first house, I covered the down payment. And when interest rates climbed and they felt stretched, I quietly arranged a monthly transfer to help with the mortgage. He never demanded it, but he accepted it easily. And slowly, without realizing it, I became something else in his life. Not father, not mentor, not memory of sacrifice, just security. The dinner, the invitation sounded cheerful. "Dad, come over Saturday. Rebecca's cooking your favorite." I shaved carefully that evening, wore my navy blazer, polished shoes I hadn't worn in months. The house was beautiful, modern kitchen, large island, spotless floors. The kind of home I dreamed Daniel would have someday. We sat down to dinner. The wine flowed. Daniel talked about a promotion, new investments, a vacation they were planning. Then Rebecca mentioned renovating the kitchen. Granite countertops, imported tiles, custom cabinets. Daniel laughed and leaned back in his chair. Well, Dad's basically our silent partner anyway. The words hung lightly in the air. I smiled politely. What do you mean? He chuckled, swirling his wine. I mean, without Dad's financial backing, we'd still be renting that shoebox apartment. He's like our long-term investor. Rebecca gave a small laugh. Something inside me tightened. I don't see it that way, I said gently. Oh, come on, Dad, Daniel said. You love being needed, it gives you purpose. Purpose? As if my entire existence now depended on funding their lifestyle. Rebecca giggled again, this time longer. It wasn't cruel, but it was enough. Daniel continued. Honestly, you're like our safety net. Might as well make it official. We should put your name on the mortgage. Laughter. Glasses clinking. My heartbeat slowed in a strange way, like something inside me had gone very still. I didn't realize I was your bank, I said quietly. Daniel waved his hand. Relax, it's just a joke. There it was. The shield of every careless word ever spoken. Just a joke. But jokes are only funny when both people laugh. I finished dinner politely. Thanked Rebecca. Complimented the roast. Left before dessert. As I walked out, Daniel called after me, grinning. Drive safe, partner. Partner. I drove home in silence. The long drive. The road felt longer than usual. I remembered Daniel at 6 years old, clutching my finger while crossing the street. At 16, crying over his first heartbreak. At 22, terrified he'd fail a final exam. When did gratitude turn into assumption? When did help turn into entitlement? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark for a long time. Inside, Margaret's photo rested on the hallway table. I picked it up. I think I've made him too comfortable, I whispered. Her smile in the frame didn't judge me. But it didn't defend me either. The decision. The next morning I woke early. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called the bank. There's a standing monthly transfer, I told the representative. I'd like to cancel it. Effective immediately. Yes. There was a pause on the line. Is everything all right, sir? Yes, I said calmly. It finally is. When the confirmation email arrived, I read it twice. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclaiming space. The fallout. Daniel called that afternoon. Dad, the transfer didn't go through. It won't. Silence. What do you mean? I've decided to stop funding your mortgage. Are you serious? Yes. You can't just do that. I can. That's not fair. I inhaled slowly. What wasn't fair was being laughed at in your own home. It was a joke, he snapped. A joke requires respect. Rebecca's voice murmured in the background. Daniel's tone shifted from anger to frustration. So you're punishing us? No, I said. I'm reminding you that I'm your father, not your investor. He hung up. The quiet weeks. The first week was silence. The second week still silence. I expected loneliness. Instead, I felt clarity. I began doing things I had postponed for years. I joined a community woodworking class. I repaired the old fence in my yard. I reconnected with 2 friends I hadn't called in ages. Without the monthly transfer, my finances felt freer. But more than that, I felt visible again. I wasn't someone's background support. I was Stephen, 62 years old, Still capable. Still worthy. Rebecca's visit. 3 weeks later, Rebecca came alone. She looked tired. "Stephen, may I come in?" We sat at the kitchen table. "He's angry," she admitted, "but he's also embarrassed." I nodded. "I shouldn't have laughed," she said softly. "I didn't realize how it sounded." "It sounded like I was an object," I replied. Her eyes filled with tears. "You've done so much for us, we stopped seeing it." That sentence pierced deeper than the joke ever did. "Stopped seeing it. We need to stand on our own," she continued. "Maybe this is good for him." "For you?" I asked. "For us," she whispered. The turning point. A month passed. Then Daniel called. His voice was different. Less polished, less confident. "Dad, can we talk?" He came over that evening. No wine. No arrogance. He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly. "I've been wrong," he said. I waited. "I've been treating your help like a right, not a gift." Silence stretched between us. "When Mom died, you held everything together," he continued. "I think I assumed you always would." "I can support you," I said softly, "but I won't be diminished to do it." He swallowed hard. "We're refinancing, selling the second car, cutting expenses. I don't want your money if it costs your dignity." That was the moment I knew something had shifted. I stood and walked to him. At 62 years old, I still saw the boy who once feared thunderstorms. "I don't mind helping," I said quietly, "but help must be honored." He hugged me. This time there was no laughter. Only understanding. The real lesson. Months passed. They adjusted. They struggled a little. They grew. Daniel began inviting me to dinner again, but differently. He listened more. He joked less about money. One evening, he raised his glass and said, "To my father, the man who taught me that independence is earned." Rebecca squeezed his hand. And I smiled. Not because I had won, but because we both had. The moral. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Permission without accountability becomes disrespect. A father's generosity is not weakness. But if you give endlessly without requiring gratitude, you teach others to forget your worth. I did not cancel the payment to hurt my son. I canceled it to protect something more important than money. Dignity. I am Stephen. I am 62 years old. I am not a silent partner. I am not a retirement plan. I am not a bank. I am a father. And sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give a child is not financial support. It is the courage to say, "You will not build your life on my back. You will build it on your own feet." And that night at dinner, it was the last time my son ever confused generosity with weakness. Because respect once reclaimed does not go unpaid.